you start, and that's basically the IT4IT reference architecture, because the IT4IT reference architecture provides that bigger picture. It really shows you how everything is connected. And that is fundamentally different how most IT organizations look at themselves. They don't have that end-to-end picture. If you ask anybody in your own IT organization and ask them, how does a new demand is raised and how does it get into production? I'm sure you don't get that answer. It's not the same. It's because it's not defined and documented end-to-end. They have pieces of it. There's maybe a project management standard, how to deliver projects, or test management standards, but not end-to-end. And this is what the IT4IT reference architecture provides. It provides a structure. And the good thing is you can use this from the start. You don't need to implement this first. You use it as your blueprint and check where you are today, what are the gaps, as Mary also pointed out. And the journey is probably different for each IT organization, what they have in place and what's next. So I won't not go into much detail of this because it has been introduced by Lars as well, but it's important to start with these value streams. So one of the first things we started with is identifying in the Lloyd organization who is responsible for the end-to-end value stream. And then identify an architect, IT4IT architect, that is responsible also for the end-to-end. And then have a number of leads for each value stream. And that lead will look at his own practices and how to improve that function. I'll come back to that later. Now, just to illustrate why you need an IT reference architecture, IT4IT reference architecture. Because if you look at today, detect to correct. Anything we do today, there's an incident detected, and what do we need to do, or there's an exception detected, what do we need to do to resolve it? And you can imagine, if you look at the entire chain, that you cannot do that in the current way of working, with individual processes and tools not linked. Because what's happening is, for example, in this case, a security alarm comes in. And a security event is typically monitored by a vulnerability management system that monitors potentially vulnerabilities or attacks. So there's an event raised. That event is sent to a central security system where all the security events are combined. It's typically called a SIEM or event management system, and there's a security team that looks at those events. And then they determine what is the priority, what's happening here, what are the actions we need to take. Now, typically the security team cannot take these actions, so they need to say, okay, what is this? Let's say it's a vulnerability on a specific application component. They need to create an incident or a problem and assign it to the correct team that needs to resolve it. Now, typically, they need a CMDB to find it out. And a lot of security tools, they don't know. They have no clue about what is connected, what is this server doing, and for whom, and which application runs on it. So the next step is, you raise an incident, and then you need your CMDB and an incident management system. And then you need, let's say, implement a fix or a new patch of the application to correct it. Then we need a change management system and change process, and there's an approval needed, and then we need to create a package for that, and we need to develop and test and deploy that into test and then in production to apply this patch or fix. Now you can imagine, if you don't have an integrated workflow, this can take months, and you cannot wait months before a vulnerability is resolved. And in this use case, it's a vulnerability that really needs some coding change on the application, or at least a new package to be deployed. You need to go through all the steps to do this. And you can imagine, we need to do this more efficient, flow end-to-end. And that's why but you need IT4IT to do that. You cannot do that in the traditional way, like we implemented security monitoring, we implemented a change process and an incident management system. That doesn't work end-to-end. And the same for requirement to deploy. I will go through this more quickly, but you have a similar. If there's a requirement coming in, it needs to be developed, tested, deployed, and so on. And there's a lot of people involved, there's a lot of tools involved again, and that's the same challenge. A lot of individual packages and tools you use to manage this entire flow. And if each tool does it in its own way, then you can imagine there's no really interconnectivity. So the idea and the vision that IT4IT as a reference architect provide is basically to say, what do we need to manage in IT organization? What are all the activities we need to do? Running from project activity, development, testing activity, or incident management activities, all these activities. And with Lloyd, the vision was, let's create a single management system to manage all the tasks in the IT organization, so that we can assign the task to different teams that are involved in development and testing and operations. And because you see now more and more in DevOps that the same person that works on incidents are also working on development tasks, or they do project tasks, or they do test tasks. So you see that one person is typically involved in a lot of different processes and activities. Now you can imagine that if he needs to go through 10 different systems to see what task he needs to perform and what has priority, you can imagine the challenges that person has. So he needs to look at an incident management system, change management system, a defect tool, because typically more and more people working on multiple topics at the same time. So the vision that IT4IT provides is that integration, and at Lloyd they really are looking for an integrated layer across all these activities you do in the IT organization. It's a kind of creating a single backlog. Now that's where the IT4IT reference architecture is used as the blueprint. So it's used as a backdrop to start, okay, how are we organized today? What needs to be changed? So there's a whole roadmap created based on this model. Now let me go into the component part of tools. So for each value stream you typically need, there are a number of functional components identified like presented in the last slide. To implement these functional components, you again need some tools. And these are just examples of the building blocks you need. And I highlighted them before. But every organization has all these building blocks in its organization. So the idea is that if you select tools to support these building blocks, you need to carefully think about integration end-to-end using the IT4IT reference architecture. So selecting a portfolio management system that can integrate with your service portfolio, or integrate with development tools, or with your catalog and incident management components. And that's a challenge because today you already have tools in all these areas. You got maybe Microsoft for the monitoring or deployment, VMware for deployment, HP for portfolio management and test management, and Microsoft development and Jira. There are a lot of tools that already are out there. And then that is basically the challenge that we face in a lot of IT organizations, that every tool has its own connectors. And this is like you have Lego connects and different tools. And this is what we see in IT organizations as well. Each has its own adapters and its own integrations. And your connects you cannot really easily connect to Lego, you can imagine. And this is what we see in IT organizations as well. If you have a vendor A and a vendor B and want to integrate, like automated provisioning or monitoring, it is a big challenge today. Now, so what we need is this. Yeah? It's the universal construction kit. And IT4IT is that kit, right? It's maybe not on the lowest level as Lars was explaining, but this is what we are targeting for. And this is then the Thingiverse. I'm not sure if you know Thingiverse, but I have a 3D printer at home. So I can print, like, I want a connector for Knex and Lego, I can print it, and then I can connect the elements. And for IT4IT, we're looking at the same capabilities, that we have a portal, let's say, where all the connectors are delivered as a service. So you can download a connector for project portfolio management to another system or test management. Yeah, you can download these blocks to interconnect. It's not there, of course, today, but you can imagine that's the direction we want to go to. You have anything to anything that can be connected, and you implement it and download it in your own IT organization. Yeah? And it's not there today, right? But you can imagine that's the way we're looking at it. It needs to be standardized, open, to communicate. And it's an awful looking thing, but this can connect to anything, right? So it's basically our IT4IT reference architecture, but then on a level 4 or 5. Okay, now then looking at Lloyd, looking at the journey, and I think the journey that is displayed here is similar as you can do it in your own organization, because the approach is not that much different as you need to take to any IT organization. So the approach is very roughly showed here. I will not go through all the bullets, but you can imagine you start with the big picture. That's the key, right? You don't zoom in, and because if you start with an inventory of everything you do already or improve, then you need to, maybe you need to look at new project management system, test management tools. If you now do an inventory of all the things you're already doing as improvements, there might be 20 or 30 projects running. It could be improving test management, deliver agile delivery, improving the project management, chargeback, anything. But for the IT4IT implementation, you need to think one step back and say, what does the end-to-end picture look like? So you take the IT4IT reference architecture, and then you plot how you do that today. So that's where we started. But before you can start, you need to create a management vision. What is my IT organization looking like in the coming 3 years? Because if you don't have that vision, then the reference architecture would not help that much either. So you start with, what is my new role as an IT organization? What is my strategy, my vision on IT management? Then you sell that internally, and then you get buy-in, and we start with an IT4IT reference architecture review. So it's basically, you take the reference architecture and you plot how you do all these components today. So how does your tool architecture look like? How does your process model? How is your data model? How is the organization with the skills and roles are positioned? And then you can plot that to the IT4IT reference architecture, identify the gaps, because in the reference architecture you see what should be connected and what components do you need. And then you can easily see where are the gaps potentially in your model, or where do you have duplicate tools or inconsistent processes. And then based on that, you're defining a sort of target state using the reference architecture again, and then prioritize what do you need to do first. Like in the Shell journey that started, I think you could almost say 12 years ago, first standardizing the service management system in the CMDB. And then, and as Mary showed later on, the financial management started, IT business management first, as a first step after that. So every organization has its own steps to take, right? So if we look at the Lloyd organization, we took the IT4IT reference architecture that is like displayed here as in a different format, and every component is plotted in how do we do that today, what the tools, or the process, who's responsible, who's accountable, as a kind of a quick scan. And then we identified what are the gaps. As you can see here, some colored lines, there are tools that are not strategic or can be replaced. There are custom homegrown solutions, or we have inconsistent data sets for managing project cost, for example. We look at the process maturity, so the different processes in the IT organization with different level of maturity, or even not documented, or there, but not always fully standardized. And so we looked at all those things, yeah? And then develop a target vision, again using the IT4IT reference architecture as your model, and then starting to say, how does my future blueprint look like? What tools do I need there? And what can I reuse what I have today? And where do I need to invest first? Okay. And one of the first steps we need to do is defining what is the engine that really runs the end-to-end value streams, because I still need different tools for development and deployment and orchestration and monitoring, and also potentially for contract and enterprise architecture and project portfolio management. But I want to make a common platform where I manage my IT tasks. And that was one of the first steps to be selected. That platform is using a standard reference model. It's called IT Guardian, where we model those processes so that you have an end-to-end view. But you imagine that one tool cannot solve it, right? You need integrations with orchestration tools like for VMware, development and testing tool like HP is used for test management. So all the integrations, they need to come together. Then looking at this, because if you look at the big picture, you may identify 30 projects you need to do over time. So then you need to prioritize what is the right order. Now in Lloyd, we looked at what are the prioritizations, and the first step, basically, if you look at the prioritization, is building the IT4IT common platform with the basic instant problem and change, CMDBs, SLA. That was the foundation. And on top of that, we had the different value streams were implemented after that. So it's a journey still going on. But you can imagine there's a phased approach because you don't get the budget to do it all. You first need to show that it works, have the benefits, get the business value directly, and then move to the next step. And the first step is shown in this picture, is to build that common framework, and that the business can order through a self-service portal the different services they want to consume, and then after that, fully automated provisioned. And so the key thing is here about phased approach. And because Lloyd is moving to a new cloud, internal hybrid cloud environment, there was also a good opportunity to start with this. It's not a green field, but it's a good way to start. So if your IT organization also moving to the cloud, then it's the best approach is to immediately make sure that anything that's deployed to this new cloud is directly delivered through this standard IT4IT model.